Jewish people left Egypt. Why do we eat matzah? We're going to eat right now. This is the most expensive thing you probably buy in the Passover is what? Matzah. $70. That's because that you like that taste. Some people $40. But the Maaseh, it's what ingredients you can tell Rabbi? What's in there? It's just flour and water. Why am I paying so much money for flour and water? Okay, that's a different discussion altogether. What are they doing? But the Maaseh, if I ask you, why do you eat matzah? Simple, elementary question. Imagine a goy comes and asks you, sir, why do you eat this thin bread that costs so much money? What do you answer him?
Because we were in a fire.
Huh?
The Jewish people ate that in Egypt.
Okay, that's not what the Torah says. So look what Torah says. I'll read you the pasuk and you tell me what does it mean. Va'afut batzek. The Torah says as they left Egypt, they baked their dough. Asher rotzim mitzrayim, which they left Egypt. Ugot matzot, they were round. That's what some poskim learned from here. Uga means round. So that's why there was a whole discussion. There was a whole controversy when the square matzot came out. Is square matzot kosher or not? So one of the reasons, besides the fact issue that there's many chametz issues with it as well, they said no, it's breaking the tradition. The matzot were always round for generations because the Torah says also uses the word uga. Uga means round.
So how come cookies have the same name?
Talking about, so therefore some people say, oh, you changed the tradition by making the matzah square.
Okay.
Don't do it. So yeah, that's why when the matzot came out, there's one of the biggest controversies when the machine matzah came out. Okay, they left it. There was people made some people
because there was a market for it.
There's a market for it. People bought it. Ki lo chametz, the Torah says ki lo chametz ki gorshu mi Mitzrayim. They were not allowed to eat chametz, for they were driven out of Egypt, for they could not delay. So what does that mean? They could not delay. So which means, if I ask you why do you eat matzah? You eat matzah. Why? Because when Jewish people left Egypt, they took dough with them and they couldn't bake it. As the Torah says, they couldn't bake it because the Egyptians told us get out of here all the way. So the Torah, interesting, if you look at a few psukim before, the Torah already tells us, can you eat chametz? No. So if I take dough and I just leave it, is that going to become chametz? Mm-hmm. Yes. So the question is, how come this dough did not become chametz? How long were they traveling? They were traveling, they didn't bake. It was baked how? It baked on their on their backs. It baked on their backs. That's what the poskim point out, that they did not put it on their donkeys. They didn't put it on their donkeys to show respect. That this is a mitzvah, this is a bread that we're supposed to eat. Torah commands us you have to eat matzah. That's why for some reason some Bukharians have also a custom to take bread, so to take the matzah and put it in a cloth and then put it on their back. To take the matzah on the shoulder. Why on the shoulder? To show that we did not put it on the donkey, we actually carried it. Some put it on the turbans, whatever it is, basically it was baked on by the sun. So the question is, how come it didn't become chametz? Wasn't the drip more than 18 minutes? Wasn't the trip? Let's say the most lenient opinion, 24 minutes. The Balatanya says that it takes chametz to become 24 minutes. So still, it's longer trip than 24 minutes. So what did they do? How did this did not become chametz? Simple question. Unless you're going to tell me this was chametz. Unless you can tell me the first time the Jewish people ate, second time they ate matzah, on the second day Passover they ate chametz matzah. That's what you're going to tell me?
No.
So obviously not. So what is it? So it says to Or Chaim HaKadosh, he's bothered with this question, and he says the following. He says, no, it says it's impossible the Jewish people were working, it must be that they were working the dough. The halacha is that as long as you work the dough, even though 18 minutes pass, as long as you're working the dough, you don't give time for the dough to rest, and therefore it does not become chametz. That's the way it works, and that's why the pasuk means that why did they chametz? No, they did not chametz. Why? Because they were constantly working the dough. According to some opinions, you have to constantly work the dough, because according to some opinions, even if you stop working the dough for a split second, for like a rega, it becomes chametz already on the spot. So therefore, you have to constantly work the dough. So that's what it is. So
you start counting the 18 minutes after you stop working the
dough? No, yes, technically yes, but there are opinions that hold that the Mishnah Berurah brings that even if it's already just stopped on a second, any second you don't work in the dough, it becomes. So it's very hard. It's very hard to do. If you watch some videos of how people make matzah, this is one thing you'll notice all the time. There's matzah being linked over here till the next guy picks it up, till the next guy makes holes. So they are like that. So therefore, there's such thing in the market called chabura matzah. What means a bunch of yeshiva guys go, they rent out a matzah bakery for a few hours, and they pay very top price for the matzah. Whatever matzah, they make the matzah and they pay for it too. They bake it and they pay for it too. So that's right. Correct. So that's that's what they did. So another thing is what they do, according to some other opinions, that actually HaKadosh Baruch Hu made them kfitzat aderech. Yes, they arrived at the next destination, short amount of time, and they were able to bake it there. So less than 18 minutes, 2 minutes they were there, and I guess they were playing. So that's basically what it is. Otherwise, you have a hard time explaining this pasuk. What happened to the matzah that they were carrying on their back? As a kid, you're growing up, you imagine, we took matzah, we took dough with us on our backs, and we imagine hours and hours and days of walking, and you were thinking, wait a minute, doesn't this dough become chametz? That's the question.
I mean, theoretically, if they're walking and it just shuffles all the time,
So that's what Chaim says. They're constantly moving the dough, constantly, so you shouldn't become chametz. But just as a side point, when you say matzah, whenever matzah was there, what kind of matzah was it? How do you imagine this matzah to be? What kind of matzah was it? Was it thick matzah? Was it
Lava.
Huh?
Like thick.
It was thick, you're saying.
Thick lava.
So interestingly, matzot for generations were always thick. Were always thick. So what's the proof of that? The Gemara tells us in Masechet Pesachim, there's a machlokes Bet Shammai Bet Hillel, how thick the matzah has to be. According to Bet Hillel, it could be even as thick as a fist. According to some, say that could be a fist. Even though it's a machlokes, Rav Huna over there was Bet Hillel's opinion taken or not. But the Maaseh, you see clearly that for generations and generations, as long as the matzah was less than this thick, as long as it was less than a tefach, it was kosher to be baked. So matzot were this thick all the time, and there's many proofs because they're constantly talking about matzot becoming rotten. How can a matzah be rotten? Can this matzah rot?
No.
Because
No, why not? Because it's very crackery, right? But what kind of matzah could rot is a thick matzah.
Inside.
No, it cooks inside. It just becomes hard because the water content is low, and it can rot in a few days. In a few days, it can start rotting, or it can go hard as well. It can go hard as well. So what kind of the matzot were soft all the time? Even though the Rama tells us the mitzvah they make rikikin. Most people interpret rikikin. Rama says, oh, the mitzvah is to make the matzot rikikin, which means people interpret, oh, rak means very, very thin. That's not what it means. That's not what it means. Rikikin does not mean, it means a stick maybe like 1 finger wide. Thick maybe like this, but not it means as opposed to a thickness like that. So that's what it is. When the Chatam Sofer says they used to have something called Raiv Matzot, and he says every time the Chatam Sofer, he says they used to be very thick matzot, and he says people shouldn't eat it because he was afraid that it was not baked all the way through and through because of the thickness. If you have a baked matzah, you'll see some.
I said it's raw inside.
Yeah, but you could bake it. Depends how you bake it. You have to know how to do it. But yeah, how do you test it? You actually have to break the matzah. And you have to see if there's any dough being stuck. You have to break it in half and see if there's if it's sticky.
You need a whole matzah for blessings.
No, so you'll see how you have to test it out. You have to test it out. So, in the end of the day, what kind of matzah did everybody have? What kind of matzah for always thick matzot thick were on the thicker side. Now they became thinner and thinner through generations, maybe, but the crackery matzah is seemingly 200-300 years old, not maybe less. So that's the way the matzot used to be. The question is, if a person is eating thick matzah, he says, you know what, I want to go eat the matzah that our forefathers used to eat. They used to eat the thick lafa matzah. Is he doing something wrong? Is he breaking tradition?
No.
Why not?
Because that's how it used to be.
Exactly, it used to be, and the fact that there's a preference to eat the bread certain way, it's not considered a custom. It's impossible to be considered, it's a custom for my father used to eat crackery bread. And if your father eats lipyoshka, then you wanted you decide to eat sliced bread, does that mean you're breaking tradition? It doesn't work this way. It means bread, that's not really a custom. It's not really a custom. No, it's not like skitnia. No. Here we're talking about types of bread. As long, right? So correct. So I said why? Because so it's a good question. I'm not sure either because of the influence of the Ashkenazim or because people just didn't. Yeah, and because again it was more practical thing to do. Why is it practical? Because it lasted. It lasted. Most people did not bake at home. Back then, people used to make fresh matzah every day. Every day, which means you ate the matzah for the night. The next day, the mother got up. She made fresh matzot for the day, and that's how it used to be. Because these matzot did not last. They were soft. They didn't last. They went bad very quickly. However, back then people just started to say, you know what? I just want to make one batch and get it over with. So then you will have to resort to make a very crackery matzot, in order to not to go rotten. That's the way it will work.
Bukharians make it like tunu.
Right. Again, there was more because not everybody had an oven, not everybody did it. Everybody just came. A few families got together and made it in somebody's house, and they did it also way in advance, and it needed to last all the way to Passover. They couldn't afford for it to get moldy, so therefore they had to make like crackery. That's
another question also.
Yeah.
So when they bake this matzah, it's baked by the sun, right? But
yeah.
If we bake matzah nowadays by the sun, it's not considered.
Right. Today it's not like that, but back then that's as long as again was it chametz? No, it was not chametz.
It wasn't actually.
Again, if you bake by the sun, you're not yotzei by the seder. But this not the matzah was eaten by the seder. The seder was done in Mitzrayim, on the right, and then the next day they left Egypt.
And then they learned the law of matzah.
Right. No, the matzah was given before. But again, if a person bakes matzah on the sun, it does not mean that it's chametz. It's not kosher for consumption on the seder night because it needs to be baked, but does not become chametz.